China has accused the United States of undermining global strategic stability and provoking competition among major countries. These comments were made in a new defense white paper released by China today. It also outlined plans to modernize its military, which it says will be a force for peace. China noted that war is evolving towards intelligent combat and called for more cutting-edge technology in its arsenal. And an expert is here to share with us his thoughts on China's defense white paper. Thompson is a visiting senior research fellow at the Kuan School of Public Policy in NUS.
Drew, thanks so much for coming in. China's accused the US of undermining global strategic stability. Help us understand exactly what it means when it says that.
Well, I think you have to understand, of course, that strategic competition is now the baseline, right? The Trump administration has been very clear since publishing the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, that they see competition with China as the standard. So I think this is China's way of responding to it. There's also a very different signal coming from elsewhere in the region that seeks much more robust U.S. presence and a more sustained U.S. presence in the region. So it's really a mixed bag here in terms of China's perception and the rest of the region's perception.
Okay, but then, you know, China and the U.S. are already embroiled in a trade war. How will this latest defense paper saying that, you know, the U.S. is undermining, how will it actually affect relations?
I don't think these are mutually exclusive. You'll notice in the way that the white paper handles the U.S.-China military-to-military relationship, it describes it as being inherently stable. So, in fact, there's very little military competition going on, and it highlights many of the aspects of cooperation. So it's a complicated relationship. So you have a very strategic level of competition, of which trade is a part, and the security partnerships and relationships is another part. But trade is inherently mutually beneficial when it works. So what the two sides are doing is readjusting the trading relationship to make it more equitable, and eventually it should stabilize. So I don't see one as negatively impacting the other at this point.
And what stood out for you then with this white paper that China has released, the first one in 4 years?
So it's intriguing that they skipped a cycle. Normally they're released every 2 years. But this is the second one that's been released under Xi Jinping's era, and what struck me was how much it has his imprint on it. It uses much of the language that was ensconced in the Constitution after the last Party Congress, so a lot of that language reflects the, shall we say, the Xi Jinping feeling and language, right? Terms like new era and a common shared destiny for humanity. So I think that kind of language really reminds you and drives home the fact that this is a party army. This is the armed wing of the Communist Party, and their primary responsibility is to ensure the continued survival and rule of the party. And there's a very strong emphasis in the report on domestic issues. So it's clear now that it's not just about external and maritime, but domestic as well. So that stands out for me.
Okay, but then, you know, the white paper also highlighted the need for the military to modernize. It actually concedes that, you know, its military lags behind. How should we be reading into this? You know, it doesn't seem like it's a sign of weakness. Perhaps we are placating the rest of the world. Like, we spend billions, but don't worry, we're still not up to par yet.
So, I mean, nobody accuses the Chinese military of being weak or a paper tiger.
Exactly.
But China, of course, has the right to modernize its military, and that's a perfectly legitimate aspiration to have. I think what's troublesome is the lack of concurrent increases in transparency. What we're not seeing is commensurate with the amount of growth that we've had in military capabilities, a commensurate growth in transparency. So this paper, while being very large and very dense in terms of substance and data, it really lacks, there's very little in there we don't already know. And there's very little in there that actually reassures neighbors and the United States about their intentions. So I think China has to really put much more effort into increasing transparency if they're going to reassure people and have more mutual trust in the region. Well,
some of the language that they used was an attempt to reassure. They did say that it was an armed forces or military force for peace, which almost sounds like an oxymoron. But what do you make of it sort of coming out just days after we had sort of a air skirmish, if you like, with South Korea to do with a military exercise between Russia and China, which even resulted in shots being fired?
Yeah, that's a very dramatic development. I think that's a real indication of how unstable military expansion is right now, and how much more effort has to be put into confidence building, programs and projects that can increase transparency and can improve communications between the two sides. Russia, China, South Korea, the United States, they all have hotlines connecting one another. But are they being used properly? Are they being used effectively? Confidence-building measures need to be really enhanced to ensure that you don't have miscalculation or misperception that could lead to a conflict. So it's very, very disturbing and something we have to watch carefully.
All right. What about your thoughts on the warning that the PLA has said that, you know, the army could be deployed in Hong Kong to contain the ongoing anti-government protest that's currently happening?
So that was not part of the paper,
Correct.
but part of the discussion during the rollout. So, I mean, obviously, everybody is watching Hong Kong very closely, and it's very disturbing as well. And it's not getting better. And I think the Hong Kong government is struggling to meet and understand the protesters and their demands. So increasingly, it's possible that force is going to be used, and the question is who's going to do it. Is it going to be the Hong Kong police force, or are they going to need assistance? And it's written into the basic law that the PLA can deploy if requested by the Hong Kong government. So I wouldn't interpret it necessarily as a threat, but definitely it's a reminder that force is an option. One thing that's very clear in this defense white paper throughout is that the PLA does not renounce the use of force, and certainly that was made clear on Taiwan as well. So China is sticking to its guns on one country, two system and is not compromising. So force is going to be potentially on the table for Hong Kong. So, and the onus is really on the Hong Kong government to establish better communications and better relations with the protesters, better understand what their concerns are, and see if they can improve governance and improve programs that actually address those underlying concerns and actually serve the needs of society.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in and speaking to us on, you know, China's white paper there, the defense white paper. We've been speaking with Thompson from the Kuan School of Public Policy.